reason I'm telling you this is because I have this deep sense that the majority of the human family condemn themselves more than God would ever do. And the reason for this is organized religion. Good. I like this big screen. See my chat. I can see my chat real clear now. I can see this big screen is awesome. So this also opens up a whole new awareness. If we are specifically told, judge not, lest ye be judged, are you going to call the Godhead, the Oversoul, a hypocrite? I'm not. If I am to do all things to be like the Oversoul, if I am to mimic spirituality as much as I can to strengthen my connection to Source, if Source informs me to judge not, lest ye be judged, then am I calling God a hypocrite? Or am I being revealed a fundamental aspect about our Creator that religions have lied to us about? So Charles Ford had come across enough data to conclude that he could single out in the history of the world 1902 as being particularly weird, unusual. This should call all Archaix veterans, especially those who've gone through my Phoenix material. This should get your attention. Remember, he poured through 520 years of scientific and eyewitness report data, and he spent 22 years doing it. And his conclusion was 1902 was unlike any other year in world history. Where was the sun? What happened to the sun that you wouldn't record time by it? It's the brightest object in the sky. So it's the most noticeable moving object in the sky. Why would all these cultures ignore the sun? Well, I'm going to tell you, because they couldn't see it. The vapor canopy world, this is another fundamental aspect of the Phoenix research. We have a world in which Phoenix brings and collapses vapor canopies. Vapor canopies are created very fast and they're destroyed equally fast. Vapor canopies are created when volcanoes, submarine volcanoes, and volcanic flues above sea level are venting. The mesosphere instantly increases in moisture and dust particulates, pumice and ash. The red dust particulates coming from Phoenix blanket the upper mesosphere. Within weeks or months, a vapor canopy will block out the sun. 2006, the whole world collapsed. Where do you think we'd be today? You wouldn't be listening to me on the internet, that's for sure. No, we would be in micro communities, learning how to farm, learning how to do all kinds of things, and the world would have been a fundamentally different place. If there was a total systemic collapse in the year 2006, I promise you, most of us that were alive in 2006 wouldn't be listening to me right now. No, wouldn't even be alive. Yeah, because a total systemic collapse does not just have a loss of life during the event, but life is continually lost, even in the next year and the next year after that. It becomes a mathematical pattern, and it diminishes. It diminishes as time passes until there's a stabilizing factor. And ordinarily, after a reset, the stabilizing factor is always what is the population and what is the population's sustainability for whatever food is available. If they're on a coastline and somebody has taught everybody else how to fish and all that, then a coastal community is going to be far more populated 100 years later than a community that's inland having to basically hunt and gather. Hunter-gatherer communities never become very populated. Never. What happens in 2046? According to the book of Revelation, 1/3 of reality is removed. 1/3 of the day, 1/3 of the night, 1/3 of the stars, 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of mankind is removed during the trumpet judgments. So it survived a flood, and that its builders were unknown, and that it antedated Egypt itself. These were the Islamic scholars who put together the beliefs of living Egyptians and old books from Egypt. So he cited a lot of the Coptic and early Greek manuscripts that supported this idea that the pyramids weren't Egyptian. They were built before Egypt existed, and they were built in a world that we don't know anything about because it was destroyed in a flood cataclysm. Of course we do. We've seen Technolithic artifacts all over South America. All over South America are practice molds where somebody was using some type of stone cutting, stone molding technology, and they practiced everywhere. They're all over South America. We've seen upside down staircases. We see whole practice molds in multiple tiers all throughout South America in the side, in the weirdest places. It's like a people were trying to understand a technology that they were unfamiliar with. And so they left hundreds of sites that were all just practice molds. So if you want to see these type of sites, Jimmy Corsetti shows some of them every once in a while. So does Brian Forrester. Those pictures are pretty common, but that's all they are. Practice molds. I believe David Hatcher Childress in his Lost City series even theorized that it was some type of, those were practice molds. And maybe where I've got that from. So we are confronted with a situation where we are now using microplastics, microtechnologies. We're now doing all kinds of things where we're creating interfaces between the mind and technology. We're creating virtual realities to where we can even entrust a man with a $500 million machine after he is first perfected using that machine after 2,000 hours of flight simulator time. So if our virtual simulators are now to the point where we can train people to do the real thing using the simulators, our technology is sufficient now to the point that we can envision that something like the Great Pyramid would have required almost a 3D printer type technology beyond anything that we have presently developed. Remember, for those new to my channel, and if you're just now listening to me, every bit of this may sound like madness. But when you see the actual scientific data about the measurements of the Great Pyramid, and you see the building methods, and you see all these anomalies, things that do not make sense because they weren't built by a primitive society and never could have been. Atlantis could not be the Archaix structure. Plato wrote that Athens' enemy came from beyond the Pillars of Hercules. That's the Atlantic Ocean, the Strait of Gibraltar. Plato's criteria for Atlantis is an island civilization in the Atlantic, not Africa. African interior disqualifies because it's not an island. Now do you understand why it's so important for these younger Dryas theorists to link Atlantis to that period of time? They want you to make the association that, oh, okay, well, Archaix structure could have been the Atlantic at one time. The whole world changed because that was the Younger Dryas period. Everybody knows that at the end of the last ice age, 12,000 years ago, the problem is Atlantis of Plato wasn't 12,000 years ago. With the fall of the Tower of Babel and the splintering out of cultures, now all of a sudden everybody's gone and they just move. They just leave the Near East and whole fleets go to all these places and they literally take over from the locals, the indigenous people who are smooth-skinned, black hair, black-eyed, long, straight black hair, and it's almost the exact same people in the Yangtze Valley of China as found in the Indus Valley, as found in these Sumerians who were the black-headed people who couldn't grow facial hair. It's the same olive-skinned people. They had same people of the Urubamba Valley of South America. It's like the people of a whole nother epoch that were left behind. And the Anuna, also called the Amuru, who are now founding this Heliolithic maritime empire all over the world, are using these people for their geographical location and for work. Some of it might be indentured servitude, some of them are slavery, but a lot of times we have nothing but traditions from South America of the South American people calling them the Viracocas, calling them the Votans, and Central America was the Quetzalcoatls and the Kulkulkans and the Pacals. We have all these traditions of benefactors. And as you know, the Hebrew word Tiham, Semitic, derives from the older Semitic Babylonian word Tiamat, the dragon of chaos. Palmer Smith says that the word in Genesis is actually far older than the text itself. He calls it a veritable survival from prehistoric antiquity. The word in the original is tiham, which is understood by Hebraicists to be a derivative from hum, to roar or rage. So we have this idea of a great sound, a great deafening horn blast coming from the sky that's taking everything apart. And they call it a dragon. Originally, it was called the Egyptian Book of Life. But this is what we find on the ossuaries. This is what's very clearly written on the coffin text. This is the ancient Egyptian religion. I just recently did a video about it. The ancient Egyptian faith, this is what it was all about. It was all about escaping the kingdom of Seeker, the world, getting out of here, going. That's what they believed. This is what the story of the Tower of Babel was. But the Babel story isn't real. It didn't happen in Babylon. It happened in Egypt. It's a veiled threat, basically telling those inside the construct, don't try to build another gate. It's basically what it was. I got some Archaix veterans, man, I hope I got a bunch of veterans in the chat, because you are going to have some brain gasms when you hear some of this data. How 390 years after the Great Flood was packed full of all kinds of events. Oh, and guess what? Hidden, just tucked into my notes as if it didn't matter where it was, I found the actual translation in Sumerian for the word shar. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. Just tucked in my notes. Yeah, guys, it's amazing. I keep going through all these files, and John's helping me organize this stuff. And Dawn has a friend named Lisa. She's a good typist, helping me organize all these notes, put them in it, man. And I keep finding these things like, oh my God, I can't believe there's the amount of data that I recorded when I was in prison. I just I didn't have time to collate a lot of this, so I was just in data recording mode. Just get it all down, sit at home. Get it all down, sit at home. And it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Shocking me. All right. So I have so on the 30th of this month, we're just going to get together for about 9 hours and kick it in Houston. And then on May 11th, we're going to be in Tampa. Probably May 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. I know for a fact we're going to Virginia. I just don't know when. But I do know that in May, I have a family reunion, and Dawn's going with me. I don't know why she wants to meet all those crazy people. I really don't. But I'll flying into Reno. I'll be flying into Reno with Dawn, and I'm gonna introduce her to my family. My dad's really excited about going. So, man, it's gonna be something. All right. So we got 1,300 pairs of ears. So let's get this underway. Yeah, I'm excited about this. So in the chronological record, we have the picture painted in the Deucalion and Pyrrha traditions. We have the picture painted that nothing was happening for a few years after the flood of Deucalion. Nothing. People were living hand to mouth. So in 1919, in his book of the Damned, Charles Fort wrote, "I think myself that in 1903 we passed through the remains of a powdered world left over from an ancient interplanetary dispute, brooding in space like red resentment ever since." That's a really interesting picture he paints. The problem with it is that he didn't know that the 1764 sun darkening of Professor Hoffman was connected to the 1902 red dust and red mud. He didn't know about the 138-year periodicity of the Phoenix. He didn't know that the same thing happened in 1626. He didn't know that this happened in increments of 138 years going back 58 centuries. Charles Fort was unaware. Easter Island's not old. So you asked me about what artifacts have been found from 5239 or before. I don't know. I can't cite any. I don't know. Richard Thompson and Michael Cremo in Forbidden Archaeology do a very good job of showing things that have been found, like the Nampa figurine that's been found 600 feet below the surface of Ohio. Many artifacts have been found at great depths in North America, pulled up with it, digging for wells. When they dig for wells and they drill all that up, they find these human artifacts, lots of things. Hundreds of metallic objects of human manufacture, beautiful jewelry, vases, cups, rings have all been found in coal deposits deep in the earth. So I don't know how many times we've been through all this. I just don't know. But I do know that in the Ogaigian deluge, 1687 BC, I know that the Andes Mountains were thrust 12,000 feet high in the sky, or actually 14,000 feet high in the sky. How do I know this? Because we have it positively dated 17th century BC, which was 1687 BC. It's a scientific bullseye by many different species of analysis, even in the chronological records, even in actual writings. I have showed you guys where hundreds of years ago it was cited that 1687 BC was about the date that Tiahuanaco was destroyed, Pumapunku was destroyed, Cuzco, all the Andes mountain civilizations around Lake Titicaca. The reason I'm mentioning that area of the world is because a lot of researchers want to claim that these are 12,000-year-old ruins when it's not true. It just happened 36 centuries ago. Because all they have to do is provide an explanation. They do not have to tell the truth. But an occult police force is interesting because all throughout the historical record, how many times have you read stories about people who were suddenly rescued? And it was just unbelievable circumstances. People on a motorcycle were rescued when they felt strong arms wrap around them and protect them as they fell. And instead of getting all the squidding down the highway and leaving all their bones, sinew, and muscle all over the asphalt, something protected them, and it's inexplicable. These stories are common. Yeah, a whole airplane crashes, one person walks out and they're unscathed, they're untouched. An occult police force, something that controls the narrative, something that also, remember, I tell you all the time, guys, the world would not be the way it is with us being able to do the things we do and experience the rights, privileges, and immunities that we do retain if there wasn't a benefactor force operating, protecting, watching, overseeing. The world would have collapsed into absolute despotism, absolute chaos, pandemonium, and slavery if this occult police force was not doing its job. For two orbits or two periodicities, that's real close to 1,600 years. I would like to see Mr. Hines' research to be able to see if what he found in the historical record matched the 792 years of the Nemesis X object, and he just didn't know it. He thought it was a greater period. He doubled it to 1600 years. That's what I would like to see. All right, now we get to the final part of this presentation, which is the best part. We're going to get to the 1902 data now. So many of you have seen my presentations on 1902. Archaix veterans, you already know. I've got many, many videos, many data sets, many data points. I've got published books, a whole chapters about the year 1902, all the strange things that happened, all the things that, all the engines of censorship after 1902 that has gone into covering up those events and acting as if nothing have ever happened. Yeah. I've gone through the alchemical treatises. I've gone through the prophetic material. I've shown you the chronological material, everything, all this massive historical focus on the year 1902. He says these were not natural, these weren't natural burials. This was the result of a cataclysm. Professor Huxley remarks, there can be no doubt that the physical geography of Europe has changed wonderfully since the bones of men, mammoths, hyenas, and the rhinoceros were washed pell-mell into the cave of Ingress. Sir Charles Lyell confesses that after a very patient examination of the comparative antiquity of the fossils, it is impossible to come to any other conclusion than that man was introduced into the world at an earlier period than geologists have believed. This is uniformitarian brainwashing. So when people were trying to recover, then 6 months later, about 5.5 months later, November 1st, November 2nd, all of a sudden, the Nemesis X object appears and just wrecks shop. Yeah, they didn't have a chance. They didn't have a chance that year. Okay, so I want to show some pretty compelling stuff here. What is this? What am I looking at here? Oh, okay. There's the pre-flood world. You can see the 207-year periods. This is another aspect of the Phoenix phenomenon. 414-year periods that form the 2070 years of the pre-flood world, starting with the Phoenix. The Genesis is 1656 years of the pre-flood world, which is right. It's from the Phoenix destruction, but the Phoenix chronology begins in 4309 BC, which is 414 years before that. I got other charts for that. But here it is right here. The Great Flood happened exactly at 33.3 Jubilees, 2239 BC, the year 1656, Anno Mundi. There's no record, no pictures, nothing of the building of the Great Pyramids in the entire history of what we know of as the two kingdoms, Egypt, North and South. Nothing. But the history books, the establishment literature is going to try and get you to think when they're talking about Egypt and pharaohs and the Egyptian book of the dead. They're trying to talk. They're showing pictures of the valley of the kings and all that. They always throw pyramids in there. They always throw these pyramids in there to get you to think the pyramids were Egyptian. This is what they do all the time in the books. They're very good at what they do. And many of the dilapidated, fallen, imploded pyramid structures are Egyptian because they tried to copy what they found. But the Giza structures stand alone. The ancient Saqqara, realm of the dead, in the Egyptian Book of Life, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. 1764, 500,000 Europeans looked up and the sky darkened. Astronomer Hoffman just happened to be at the telescope studying sunspots when he saw an object cover 1/5 of the sun's surface. 1764. 1902, you guys already know. I got so many 1902 videos. Everything happened in 1902. And what's really interesting about it is people new to my channel don't have a clue what we're talking about. They just don't know. That's how amazing amazing the establishment has been at scrubbing history. Yeah, you can't find these things out on the internet. You got to go to the original sources. You got to go to the books to find out what happened in 1902. That history has been scrubbed. So, that's a much better chart. So, moving right along, that's the Phoenix phenomenon every 138 years. Most of y'all already know that, though. And our last one on this chart was the Mayan long count Bactans. Here it is. The Mayan long count system began 3113 BC. It is a day count system, just like the original Vedic, just like the original Sumerian Shar system. Here it is. It's all 144,000 days. How do we know they're a part of the original same system? Because the yugas are predicated off multiples of 108,000 days, 216,000 days. Three of them is 324,000 days. Where have you heard that number for? 432,000 days. Where'd you hear that number for? 648,000 days, 720,000 days, 864,000 days. What have I just named? I named in days, which you've already found in yugas, in the yuga system. It's the same thing. The Mayan, here's 144,000 days, but 3 back then is 432,000 days. It's the same thing as the Sumerian Shar system. Enki appeared 432,000 turnings of the stars, Shars, thank you, from 3439 BC to 2239 BC is 12 centuries. That's it. You don't have to go by the Billy Carson, Zechariah Sitchin version of history, which promotes confusion because it pushes things back to 500,000 years. Nothing happened 500,000 years ago that's relevant to us today. And there's no Sumerian records that would ever say that 500,000 years before the Great Flood, the gods appeared. Who would have cared? There would have been many, many, many great floods in 500,000 years. It doesn't make sense. But what does make sense is the original Shar is a day count system. And in applying that solves all the mystery, all the chronological mysteries from the historical record are solved. Simple as that. And the Chinese stories tell that just after the reign of the 10 emperors, after the creation, mankind struggled against fierce and gigantic monsters. Also, the Chinese say that after the 10 emperor period, not only were the animals huge, but people lived extraordinary long lives. Sounds like the Chinese had a vapor canopy tradition. In India, the 10 Petries or Petries, like Jupiter, the father Yu, the 10 Petries were called in ancient India the 10 fathers. Also, the old Germans and the Arabs had traditions of 10 patriarchs that began in some ancestral period before true history began. Iranian legends, probably Zoroastrian. Iranian legends recall a 10-king dynasty in antiquity that were specifically called the men of ancient law. Also, in Plato's narrative of Atlantis, we find that the capital city, Poseidonius or Poseidon or whatever, there were 10 statues of 10 ancient kings and 10 corresponding statues of their wives in ancient Atlantis. It's interesting. It's all very interesting. And the very fact that the Atlantis story also mentions the 10 kings only proves even further that Graham Hancock and Billy Carson are absolutely wrong about Atlantis being 11,600 BC. Jimmy Corsetti as well, and a bunch of others. It can't be 11,600 BC. The Atlantis narrative of the 10 kings, the 10 Petries, the men of the ancient law, the Genesis text of the 10 patriarchs, the 10 kings of Berosus, they all fit. They all fit in the mid-second millennium BC. There's no way it could have been in the 12th millennium BC. It wouldn't have happened. It's crazy. You can't even take the blocks off to rearrange them. Why? Because the adhesive is 1/50th of an inch thick, and it is stronger than the limestone blocks themselves. The Great Pyramid is a structure full of enigmas, but it's outlived every culture and civilization in this world. It's still there. And yet the interior measurements can still be found, and they line up with ancient calendars. How can this be? I'm going to show you. But how can it be that the structure's still here? The great Macedonian empires that became the Ptolemies ruling over Egypt. The pyramids were already a mystery and unknown by the time Alexander the Great's descendants ended their own rule over Egypt in the line of Cleopatra. Done. Great Pyramid, still old, still mysterious. So the church invented the Children's Crusade, inventing a story that all these kids got together and decided that since they were the true children of God and their parents couldn't defeat the Muslims and take back Jerusalem in the Crusades, they themselves would embark on a crusade. But the historians that have looked into this matter know that that's not true. No armies of children were ever seen marching toward the ports. How would they even got passage on a ship? How would they even made the overland journey to Jerusalem? It was just a cover story to explain something that was unexplainable. So we're going to start with ancient Egypt here. And I'm going to make, though, even my Archaix veterans are going to have some aha moments. The Phoenix phenomenon is very deep, but it was a knowledge that was preserved from a world before our own. Even 1,000 years ago, Al-Masaudi, Al-Makrizi, Biruni, the great Arab travelers and scholars, they all wrote about Giza and the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and its mysteries, and they all were in agreement that had the Great Pyramid complexes been built after the flood, then there would have been a written record as to the builders. There would have been a civilization able to lay claim to their construction. The Arab scholars are not wrong. The Great Pyramids are pre-cataclysm, and this is why there's no historical references to the building of these structures. In Herodotus, 450 BC, we're talking about almost 25 centuries ago. This great historian, Herodotus, even agrees nothing is known about the Great Pyramids. He's not even willing to call them Egyptian. Remember, I showed you guys charts. My Archaix veterans, you've seen the charts. There's 450 miles between the Great Pyramids and the oldest Egyptian cities. Yeah, there's nothing but desert in between them. That's why it was always called the two Egypts. 450 miles in the ancient world was the distance between empires. But all of a sudden, Egyptologists want to tell you that the southern Egypt that called Waset and Kemet, that buried their rulers in the Valley of the Kings, somehow also came all the way north and built all these pyramids to put pharaohs in them, for which not one mummy has ever been found. So what do you do when, because I've had people say, hey guys, hey Jason, all this is fascinating, and I agree with you. And yeah, every 138 years you've made your case. But what about this event? How come this event doesn't fit in 1561 when the sky changed over Nuremberg? What about 1566? Well, over Germany, the sun did some weird things. What about 1917 when at Fatima in Portugal, the sky moved erratically? Now, what about the year 1752 when the strange octagonal star appeared in the sky? I've had people challenge me about those events. Say, hey, how come they're not a part of the feast? No, and there's two answers. Remember the research of Ishak Bentov. Knowledge is in the field. Many different people have discovered the exact same thing at the exact same time in opposite hemispheres of the world. Many times people have written books who have never had any contact. There was never any influence from an outside source. People who were isolated on islands in different parts of the world would come up and write a book, and these books would be published around the same time, and they're literally the same story, just changing the names of the figures. This has happened. It's been documented in mystery channels over and over and over. These passages contain elements of an almost forgotten cataclysm, later moralized by Babylonian and Jewish religionists. It demonstrates that the loss of Eden and curse concerns a major civilization destroying catastrophe. Later, the few survivors did not even know their own origin. In 1950s, Immanuel Velikovsky came across research that told him that the Babylonian versions of the stories that later became the book of Genesis absolutely conveyed that the Adam and Eve story is after a massive destruction of a civilization, urban planning, all that, cities, people, a whole populations that were erased by the appearance of a sky dragon. Okay, I thought that's pretty compelling. It's pretty compelling. The historic records from the Near East reveal that Sargon the First, the Sargon is Amar Udak, this is Nimrod, claimed to have vanquished the 7 kings renowned from pre-flood antiquity. This guy's really boasting now. Later, Amar Udak would assume the title Hammurabi. Hammurabi is his Amorite title. This is when the Amuru appeared and they became a part of his kingdom, and they gave him a new title and they brought him an army. This is in the historical record. This is how his kingdom was saved after a military defeat. And Amraphel became Hammurabi, which is Hammurabi. Jason didn't make this up. I've shown the data. The ADBC system was invented specifically to hide the Phoenix. What do? Too many coincidences exhibits no coincidence at all. I've been running my mouth for a long time. I haven't even looked at my chat. That's right. Smash that like button. I don't even think it matters, but looks good. Excuse me. So, you guys know that I had made a discovery in studying the construct, and I have demonstrated it, showing how when any number from 1 to 9,999, anything above that is just a reduplication of a lower number. So the Abraxas symbol of the 2 snakes coming out, dude, guys, it's not the only place. In ancient Egypt, we have depictions of the winged disc. The winged disc, I've told you guys, Zechariah Sitchin was wrong. He tried to say Nibiru was the winged disc. Never was Nibiru ever described as the winged disc in any of the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts. That was the phoenix. The phoenix was winged. Nibiru was not. Nibiru was a star. It was a red star that appeared over and over and over. And for those who think that Zechariah Sitchin invented Nibiru, he did not. I have a book in my library called Magicians and Astrologers of Babylon and Nineveh. And in that book, which was published in 1900, it concerns the scholarly arguments that were going on in the 1890s about the identity of Nibiru. There was a school of thought that sided with the fact that Nibiru could be Jupiter. But there was another school of thought that says Nibiru can't be Jupiter because we already have multiple names for Jupiter, and Jupiter doesn't fit these qualifiers. And Nibiru was also attached to prophecies about the return of a golden age. So, yeah, Phoenix was winged, not Nibiru. This is something that I've theorized as well. This is something that many mystics theorize. This is something that Charles Burgoyne wrote about the ancient ones who were trapped inside the dark satellite. He wrote that in his book in 1880. I cited him multiple times in my published books. Ford wrote that emissaries have come to this earth, secret meetings, esoteric ones in Europe before the war broke out. What in the hell is Charles Fort talking about? That is too detail specific. Before the war broke out, that would include 1902. Emissaries have come to this earth, secret meetings, esoteric ones in Europe before the war broke out. Wow. So he's talking about the period before 1913. Now, here's an interesting argument, because this dude right here, Smith Palmer, I keep wanting to call him A. Palmer Smith, but his name is A. Smith Palmer. He's using the scripture to interpret scripture. He says that 1 Corinthians chapter 14:33 says that God is not the author of confusion. So this is his argument that the second verse in the Bible, which introduces confusion, means this comes from something other than the Creator. And I agree. It's the Nemesis X object. It's what appears and does all this. Well, you can call it Tiamat, call it dragon, great celestial dragon of chaos, call it what you want. So he says that many have sought to escape from the difficulty by regarding the detailed account given in the first of Genesis as not that of the original creation, but rather that of the recreation or reconstruction of a material world that was already existent and already, for some unexplained reason, brought to confusion. But when you have a rising number of people waking up, no longer participating in those paradigms, it has to knit new experiences for those individuals. What's happening is the construct is unraveling. But as a matter of self-preservation, the construct now finds ways within the construct to start merging everything and everybody in all systems, because if it gets enough souls participating in the larger dungeon programs, it saves a tremendous amount of processing power that it needs for those over here that are waking up, because each one of these that are waking up, it has to knit for them a whole new world, because those reality tunnels have to be created and be believable, because you are a participant here. And as long as you're in here participating in the game, which we call life, it has to give you a life to experience. Dungeon programming is merely a control mechanism, but these systems are failing. The whole idea of New World Order is all about processing power. The whole idea about a one world currency is all about the preservation of processing power. The whole idea of a one world religion is all about the construct trying to preserve processing power until the Exodus point. It's because we have cross-ecliptic planes. We have two ecliptic planes that form a cross. Our sun provides one equator where all these planets supposedly in the model orbit. But there's something down there that provides its own ecliptic. And every once in a while, objects pass north to south, covering the sun from the perspective of an object in our position. This is what Professor Hoffman saw. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that was precisely 138 years before 1902 when he saw that. Charles Fort documented all the red dust and red mud fallout in the scientific periodicals of the day in 1902 and 1903. When he was done documenting all this mysterious stuff, he also said a new star appeared. It was red in 1902. If, as geologists assert, coal is derived from vegetable matter grown in situ and then submerged, how are we to account for the Arctic regions being so abundantly provided with coal that it is found cropping out from the sides of the sandstone cliffs, and water-worn nodules of that mineral cumbering the beaches over large areas? So I'm going to talk about that coal real quick. What we have is a scenario. The very fact that coal has been found underneath these clay deposits, underneath these basically islands of bones. What had happened was all the water of the southern hemisphere dumped into the northern hemisphere, overtook all the continents. while exposing dry land to the southern hemisphere. But it had to go back. Once it hit the Arctic and compressed all the floating detritus, and this took days, maybe even weeks. The water starts going back. As it's going back, the bloated, decayed remains of hundreds of millions of mammalian life forms were fused together as they were rotting and floating in these waters. They are deposited as islands. And this is how they've been found all over the northern hemisphere. We're going to get to the Babylonian king list of the Chaldeans, preserved by the Greek Babylonian historian Berosus. Berosus is a problem because we have in Berosus someone that Zechariah Sitchin and Billy Carson quotes as an authority. Berosus made many mistakes, but Berosus is no different than Manetho. Berosus is preserving histories that were already 1,000 years old before Berosus was born. Berosus is preserving whatever he found in the Alexandrian library, and he wrote a history of the Chaldean kings. But you can't really rely on Berosus as an authority. He's the reason these guys all think Ashar is 3,600 years. They just don't understand. They don't understand Berosus made many critical mistakes that have been corrected by other scholars, even in the days of Berosus. These right here are the Archaix material. Got a whole stack of books I'm sharing with you today because it's relevant to what we're talking about. It's relevant to this amazing book from 1871. So it warbled a lot, and that information deserves to be represented in a more serious context. And that's what we're going to do here, because the dating is almost precise. Remember, we have a lot of chronographical markers showing when Atlantis was destroyed. If you go by Plato's narrative, it's the 13th century BC. One chronological mistake had ancient authors saying that it was 9,000 years before Solon. But really intelligent people in the days of Plato corrected that mistake, because Eudoxus of Cnidos automatically knew that Solon was not told 9,000 years by the priest of Sais, because they used a lunar count system. This is why Billy Carson doesn't want to argue this. Spend too much time on that Chief Cornerstone deal. If you really want to know really in depth on the Christian mysteries and the meaning of the Chief Cornerstone and the Great Pyramid, my very first published book from 2006, my first publishing contract, I was in prison when that was published, by Book Tree of San Diego. That's the book you need to read. That's the book that covers every bit of this material. And it's packed. Walks into a cave, looks at a bone in the cave. Like, how the hell did the bone even get there? How did an archaeologist not even get that bone? And then they had this whole conversation about Atlantis. What does Atlantis have to do about 73 feet deep in this cave? You're talking to an archaeologist on Malta who's only nodding his head at you because you're a dumbass and he doesn't believe anything you're saying. And you're going in this weird long narrative about Atlantis has nothing to do with that cave on Malta. Yeah, this is the type of documentaries that Graham Hancock does. It's cringe terrible. It's terrible. But what do you do when you come across data? You come across information that some stories tell you that there's something profound about the number 138. Yeah, you find out that the Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, but the angels snitched, something Jay Dreamers knows about. The angels told Lot, "Hey man, Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. You need to say, get your family and get out of here." When Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, God found out that Lot and his daughters survived. And when they survived, what happened? Those two angels that had appeared in Sodom and Gomorrah as humans, they were cursed. They were kicked out of heaven for 138 years. Sodom and Gomorrah is a reset narrative. It's a destruction. So what do you do when you get all this information from modern researchers who can't explain why? but they've published books like Stephen Jones, biblical chronologist, the author of The Secrets of Time, who he wrote this amazing book about this 414-year cycle, the cursed Earth system. He showed the patterns in world history show that on the 414th year of an empire, of a kingdom, of a people, of a culture, something terrible happens, a reset. And I've showed multiple presentations where all the calendars of the ancient worlds synthesize. They synthesize in one key period during the vapor canopy and during a 21-year period of the life of Enoch, who was, according to the Judaic and rabbinical and Talmudic sources, was a chronologist. He was an architect. He was a mathematician. He was an astronomer. Yeah, he was a prophet. Because all of these are interrelated. It's basically a cross-disciplinary approach that Enoch took in order to do the things that he did. And we know Enoch has been named many things. He has many titles in the ancient world. It doesn't matter what somebody is called. It's what they did that identifies who they were. Where you are in life, in your happiness, in your finances, in your coordinates, has everything to do with how you perceive your relationship with Source to be. But if you truly understand that Source has already provided for forgiveness, has already provided for exodus, has already provided for protection, has already provided for sustenance, has already provided for information, has already provided for a whole future outside the construct, then there's nothing left to figure out except that Source has created us to experience everything we want to experience without fear of judgment. And that comes with set core spiritual fundamentals, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus says that the whole law is wrapped up into that one statement. Remember, many times I've conveyed to you guys, if something is true, it's going to be simple. Simple. The law is not simple. In the Old Testament, there's 615 Levitical laws. That's not simple. That's codified complexity. In Jesus' law, it's one. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's simple. And if you practice that, then you would always stay within the spiritually acceptable boundaries when you rebel, when you go your own way, when you do what you want to do, when you experience what you want to do, and you do all these things without judgment. But it also went through many, many filters. Remember, there's hundreds of years between times the story of Atlantis reappeared in the historical record. Yeah, Plato received it 200 and something years after somebody else recorded it, Solon. Yeah, Plato never met Solon. That would have been impossible. Centuries divided them men. So those men were divided by centuries. So Solon had to have had it written down somewhere for Plato to have received it. There's a filter of centuries there. There's another filter that Solon got it from the priests of Sais. The priests of Sais said it was on the temples, that the story was told on the temples. Well, I'm going to tell you what other stories told on those same temples in Egypt. The invasion of the Sea Peoples Federation. Where do they come from? The Atlantic. So we have a lot of historical verification, but the problem is we need to deal with these anachronisms, because it's these anachronisms that Graham Hancock is guilty of ignoring. Aristotle's 31,000 years is intriguing because Aristotle did not buy the Atlantis story of his teacher Plato. Using the Egyptian lunar reckoning, this 31,000 becomes a simple 1,033 years. And 1,033 years before Alexander becoming Alexander the Great in 331 BC when he sat on the throne of Babylon, that gives us the year 1364 BC exactly. That's very important because that's the beginning of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, meaning that it's correct. The beginning of the Neo-Babylonian records began 31,000 shars into the past. The errant is not subject to deception because intuition, empathy, and imagination are what moors the oversoul mortal. These three qualities aren't even yours. Intuition comes from God. Empathy is a godlike ability to feel what somebody else feels. And imagination is the creative aspect of the Godhead, not yours. The very fact that you experience intuition, that you empathize with others, that you can imagine different things is because we are not alone. And we are the vehicle by which something far greater than us is experiencing this life cell. As we'll see, there's no way it would completely defy the Atlantis narrative. So remember, the Archaix structure as Atlantis theory absolutely requires Younger Dryas theory because they need that 9,000 years mentioned by Plato to be true, even though other Greek scholars in Plato's day said it was a mistake. They got to have it. It's the only thing they have that links the Ice Age to Atlantis is that one statement. It's the only thing they've got. So to base so weak a connection to a series of theories using Plato means that every part of Plato's narrative has to fit what's being promoted. That's what I'm going to show you. These guys can't cherry pick from Plato and then ignore everything else. That's called lying. Where else? What else is it called? I know some of you've gotten upset with me about how aggressive I am in my research, but when is it not called lying when you know the truth and say otherwise? When is it not called lying? That's all I was raised to believe. So, does the Archaix structure look like an island to you? Now, J.M. Allen is another researcher that I have a lot of respect for. In his own book, Atlantis, the Andean Solution, he quotes Plato, who wrote, "It was possible for travelers of that time to cross from Atlantis to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent." Atlantis is described as an island, but it's in a chain of islands. And the chain of islands almost is connected to a continent. That's not the Archaix structure. Yeah, you only find this in old books, guys. I've never seen Zechariah Sitchin talk about none of this, but Samuel Noah Kramer does. Samuel Noah Kramer was already translating Sumerian text way before Zechariah Sitchin ever came around. But Samuel Noah Kramer gives a lot of detail about the big men, the Lugals. Yeah, this is amazing to find just a piece of legislation out there that regulated fair trades between people who are of different sizes. It's amazing. It's amazing. All right, so that's circa. It could be 2000 BC. It could be 22. They just don't know. So but the legislation exists. We just don't know exactly chronologically when it would fit in here. But this is generally the time period. When you, just like Franz Boas said in the 1890s, if you record enough facts, the answers will fall to you like ripe fruit. It just happens. With the acquisition of more and more data, you're able to disseminate fact from fiction. And I can throw all this away, which I've never presented in Archaix, because by the time you guys hear me do a presentation, I had 10 times that amount of data, but I had to remove anything that didn't really fit or was just bad data. We had so interesting that you must go through a structure that leads you underground in order to pass through a gate that is going to catapult your soul to your star. This is ancient Egyptian theology. This is what they believed. So we have this this whole period of the pyramid texts in its post-cataclysm. And it's all about the ladder of Set, the ladder of Typhon. Again, we have two concepts merged, just like we have the mansion of the Phoenix, which protects the Bin stone. Right there outside the Great Pyramid. Heliopolis was Cairo, ancient Cairo. So we have the Great Pyramid, we have an Egyptian priesthood that builds the mansion of the Phoenix, which venerates the bird of the celestial bird of the life and death of world cycles, protecting the Bin stone. And yet these concepts are found everywhere in the Egyptian Book of the Dead as well. But it's the ladder of Set, the ladder of Typhon. The ladder is a structure that takes you up. That's what a ladder does. When they relocated, they found a really nice area in the Tigris-Euphrates basin. We even have references from old texts, the Greek and Hesiod, especially in the book of Jasher, the rabbinical chronology of the world. It even says that right after the flood, when people started beginning to multiply, they went eastward and searched for an area to build a city. And when they did, they built a city, and they called it Shinar. A lot of people have made the association that Shinar is Sumer. It very well could be, but it's a post-cataclysmic Sumer, because most of the Sumerian histories happened somewhere else. The 7 kings of the Anunnaki ruling over Sumerian culture, the cities of Bad Tabira and Sippar and Shuruppak and Lara, these were pre-flood cities. We have never found the locations to those cities. We don't know where they're at, unless we did find them and we're calling them something else. I have postulated this as well, because Turkey fits all the qualifiers for the histories that we find in the Sumerian text and in the book of Genesis. The Tepes and the Huyuk sites. It's not just Göbekli Tepe, and it's not just Cattle Huyuk. There are multitudes of Huyuk sites, and there are multitudes of Tepes. And the Tepes qualify as the Edens of the Sumerian records, the walled enclosures. Turkey also has all the underground cities. It has 59 of them to date. I'm going to tell you now, you guys, I have, when I say you guys, I'm really talking about my vets, Archaix veterans, baby phoenixes. This is so over your heads, I know it. Well, my Archaix veterans, you guys can actually do whole videos on YouTube yourself, just using this template, using these start dates. And it's just looking at all these amazing rectilinear measurements throughout the Great Pyramid. And when you get and looking at Chronicon, which is source back and shows you where these dates were obtained from, and you just go through it, you will find amazing things. I know this because I never stop finding them. I just don't have time to just keep doing all this type of research. I filled this whole folder up and overwhelmed myself to the point I couldn't even convey it all to you. It's incredible. Because these aren't just random events, they're signature events in human history where great paradigm shifts occurred. New religions were fomented, great wars happened, whole very interesting personalities who totally affected the field died. It's very interesting. So this is a reference to the ancient Egyptian Noph, in reverse is Think. So it's the same thing. We're talking about Phoenix as a spirit or a spirit dragon that appears in the sky, celestial. So to the Egyptians, they taught that this Bennu bird, Bennu referring to the Pyramidion, but it's the Phoenix. This Bennu bird was linked to violent cosmic cycles and to the destruction and rebirth of world ages. Introduce the Phoenix cycle. So there's an ancient Egyptian papyrus, but it's written in Greek and it's dated as a copy from an older text from the time of Amenhotep. So to make matters worse, these two theories, they're linked to the Atlantis narrative of Plato by a single statement. Listen, guys, Reichach structure requires the Younger Dryas impact theory to be true. And then both theories added together are only attached to Plato's narrative by one statement, where Plato said that the destruction of Atlantis was 9,000 years before Solon's time. So this is critical to understand that these men are adding two theories together and bridging them to the Atlantis story by a single statement of Plato. The reason this is so important is because this 9,000 year period is not only a mistake, but it was a mistake that was corrected by another scholar alive in Plato's college, who went to Egypt and found out the truth of the 9,000 years and corrected Plato and said specifically that the Egyptians count a year as 30 days. But we can't just go by structure and phonetics. Typhon is Phoenix, but for totally different reasons. We'll get to that in a minute. This Heliopolitan cosmology is very, very interesting because the ancient Egyptians had a pantheon, the Ogdoad, and they had the Aeneid. I found this in old text, and I cited these sources for you to know that the Anunnaki highly regarded a 600-year period. And that 600-year period is astonishing because it makes sense of the Kali Yuga. It makes sense of the Yuga periods. It makes sense of the Sumerian, these long periods of days. Because 600 years, an Anunnaki Ner is precisely 216,000 days, turnings of the stars, what we know of as shars. So if you take two of these Ner, that's 600 plus 600 years. And it solves the mysteries of how the Mayan long count was originally a part of the Sumerian system and the Vedic system. They were all one calendar. 16 minutes into this video, we need to get into it because this video has got some mind benders, amazing stuff that you've seen almost exclusively right here in Archaix. All right. I want to present, share my screen, share screen. All right, we're there. We are there. I got so many, look at my lap, I got so much stuff open. Got so many things I'm working on. These are all projects I'm working on all kinds of things. All right. So this is the book I showed you guys a while back. Here it is. History of Antiquity. It was donated to the Archaix Library, the German scholar Dunker. And like I said, it was 160 years ago, published in German 150 something years ago, and then translated into English and published in English in 1877, 147 years ago. The 6 volumes that I got were in mint condition. The person that donated them to me even told me to be careful because I would be cracking the spines. Somebody had bought all 6 volumes, put them on a shelf, and they have been on that shelf, and they were already old before I was born in 1973. It's amazing, guys. Whoever bought these books bought them for me, and by extension, for the Archaix community. And this is how we receive them in mint condition. The History of Antiquity from the German Professor Max Dunker. All right. Pretty interesting. And let's just dive in. Uh-oh, can't do that one. We've already done that. Oh, it's got my videos first. All right. So, Let me see if that's exactly how we're starting this. I'm going to need to remove these videos so they don't get in my way. I like you, Book Monkey, but you're in my... So you're asking me about the chief cornerstone. The chief cornerstone is required to finish the monument of man, but it's required the history of the world for those individual souls to meet maturity, spiritual maturity. Biblical theologians believe that began in 931 BC, when there was a civil war between Israel and Judah, and they've never been together since. It completely collapsed the Davidic kingdom. David, Solomon, Saul, all that kingdom collapsed. 931 BC began the rift of the two kingdoms. If that began a 1,000-year period, then that means the 1,000th year was the year AD 70. Do you know what happened in AD 70? In AD 70, Judea was devastated when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. That was 1,000 years. None have ever approached the subject of the fine structure constant and how it relates to the interior rectilinear measurements of the Great Pyramid. There are things that I've never even said on my channel that are in my notes on the Great Pyramid, such as the reference to the number 137, the fine structure constant, is very interesting in the sockets at the four corners of the Great Pyramid. Anybody can verify this. They have been measured at precisely 137 by 137 inches. And we know 137 point something, but not quite 138, is the great fine structure constant by which every other scientific theory, hypothesis, and constant must be attached to. The fine structure constant is basically the substrate to our reality. It is very close to the Phoenix number of 138, which is the subject of another playlist. So we find in the rectilinear dimensions of the interior arrangements of the Great Pyramid, over and over and over, I have shown these numbers. There's 552 right there. 5,520. My Archaix veterans know these are all 1656 right there. 4140 right there. 414 right there. My Archaix veterans already know. Every number that I'm mentioning to you is divisible by 138. The architects of the Great Pyramid of Giza incorporated these measurements to be divisible by this number 138. And yet, never in the history of publishing has this revelation ever been expounded upon. It's never been revealed to the public. So many things on pi and phi, curvature equations, Fibonacci series, palindromes. There are so many amazing mathematical and geometrical mysteries about the Great Pyramid, and there are thousands of books on the topic. It was built to survive a cataclysm so that a last days generation would benefit from its knowledge. I'm not making that up. I've published all the sources where this information can be found. So the arithmetic that I've showed you today shows you that the Great Pyramid has something to do with the Phoenix phenomenon, but even more so, when the chief cornerstone is put back on the top of the structure and the dimensional arithmetic is made complete, then remember, every stone is a soul of man. When the monument of man is complete, during the Great Tribulation period, the 144,000 final witnesses are empowered for 3.5 years. 144,000 is not the number of the redeemed. The number of the redeemed is in the millions, just like the stones of the Great Pyramid. And in the 270th year, during the reign of Canaan, before the flood, humans began to rebel. This is very interesting. It's found in the book of Jasher, but it's also found in the Japanese Way of the Gods mythos. In the Japanese Way of the Gods, it says at one time there was a golden age and humans lived with the animals and everything was peaceful and everything was great and humans didn't have anything to complain about. And this only lasted 270 years before humans rebelled against the gods. And it's a totally different parameters, totally different descriptors. These are the ones that are sealed with the seal of the living God. These are the ones that make up the monument of man. Remember, I've told you guys, the Great Pyramid is not a portal. It is the portal. So it is called Saqqara. And build a ship and embark in it with his kindred and nearest friends. Remember, guys, most people don't know this, but a very ancient ship was found in a special sepulcher right outside the Great Pyramid. At the very base of the Great Pyramid itself, a sepulcher of unusual, gigantic size was found. And archaeologists just within the last 50 years excavated a wooden ship out of that giant sarcophagus. I'm really surprised that more people haven't done videos or written books about this. This was an amazing ship. The ship was made and it was taken apart and it was all laid out. It was 144 pieces. This ship that's called the ship of Pharaoh, some call it the ship of the sun. Noah is born, his birth signaling the appearance of a new race, of heroes, of a huge people. These are the descendants of the Anuna and the daughters of men, right here. I am not inferring they are aliens. There's no ancient aliens anywhere in this narrative at all. These are two different races that have merged to create a hybrid race that is now able to survive on the surface. This is the founding of the city of Babili. Babili would later be called Babylon, but at this time it's called Gate of God, Babili. So this is also when Dilmun is established. 6 years after the Great Flood, the Anuna established on an island of Bahrain a city and a port with quays and all that called Dilmun, and they began coming from somewhere else far away to where they used Dilmun as a staging area. And then other ships would leave Dilmun and come up the Tigris Euphrates, and then they started laying they started laying infrastructure. As early as 6 years after the total systemic collapse, we now have two primary places that are interacting with each other now with ships, merchandise. Biblical theologians believe that began in 931 BC when there was a civil war between Israel and Judah, and they've never been together since. It completely collapsed the Davidic kingdom. David, Solomon, Saul, all that kingdom collapsed. 931 BC began the rift of the two kingdoms. If that began a 1,000-year period, then that means the 1,000th year was the year AD 70. Do you know what happened in AD 70? In AD 70, Judea was devastated when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. That was 1,000 years. Most of the people alive now don't remember the Great Flood. It's just a story they heard about. It's like a bunch of us. We don't remember the Vietnam War. It's just a story we heard about. We don't remember the Korean War. It's just a story. We weren't alive during World War II. It's just a story of the past. But right now, in 2024, we would be looking all the way back to 1772. We would be looking back to a period before the Boston Tea Party. 1772 is 252 years ago. In that time, in our world, we've become not only technologically advanced, but hyper advanced. We're so advanced, we've gotten stupid. So this is the type of world we're looking at now. I've shown you on my channel over and over and over. The Adam and Eve reset was Phoenix related. It's on the 138-year periodicity of the Phoenix phenomenon. But Adam and Eve wasn't a beginning. According to the Aramaic and the Hebrew, when it's broken down correctly, it was a reset. Be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. And even in the Talmud, it explains that the serpent was ancient and a part of a prior society. Serpent means one who knows secrets, the Hash in Hebrew. Genesis, the Adam and Eve story was all about the Adamu and the Kava. Mankind and womankind. They were naked. Why? Because they had lost everything, their entire infrastructure. The cataclysm probably happened at night. Yeah, the survivors lost everything. They ran for their lives. Very few survived. This is the stories of the ancient world about Genesis chapter 1, and this is precisely what we find in the older Babylonian version called the Enuma Elish. The 7 tablets of creation were abbreviated by Jews in the libraries of Babylon to 7 days of creation. Why would they call it 7 days? Because the Jews saw that the Sumerian sexagesimal mathematics had special attention attached to the shar. Everything happened in repetitions of 7, the holy Shabbat of ancient Babylon. So the Jews copied that, and they realized that days were holy to God in the beginning. So they created a 7-day cycle of 7 shars. This is what they created. The Jews copied older ancient Sumerian texts that had been copied by the Amorite scribes. I've been through all this on my channel. The scholars of Amurru came in and translated all the Akkadian Sumerian into Amorite. And from Amorite, that's where the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the people of Rashamra and Ugarit and Nicomed and Syria, Aram, Mari, this is where they got their scriptures. Let's get back to this. We are moving. Thus, from the dynasties expressly marked as Memphitic or Theban, Memphites the north, Thebes is the south, a series may be formed which shortens the calculation of Manetho by at least 1,000 years. We might proceed further in this direction and reduce Manetho's list by 2,000 or even 3,000 years. According to the separate items of the excerpts preserved, Manetho's 30 dynasties include a series of 5,366 Egyptian years from the year 5702 to the year 340 BC. Nevertheless, Syncellus, in a passage of his own chronology, has observed that the whole period of history treated by Manetho in his own 3 books covers only 3,555 years. That's interesting. That means that Syncellus, 17 centuries ago, had access to information that allowed him to correct some of the mistakes of Manetho. That's pretty interesting. Even mainstream media is already reporting this, but it was 10 months ago when I released my videos on the seals telling you that this was going to happen this year. Now it's out in the open. Now it's being talked about across the board. Even Funky Prepper's he's been talking about it a lot, showing the evidence of what's going on in the UK. We've got people in France doing the same thing, showing everything, all the preparations that are being made. It's going to be a lot of conflict between Muslims and Christians, and it's all by design, every bit of it. Is it all out takeover of nations? No. Is it all out war? No. It's to take peace from the earth. So, in summary, I'm not amending anything I have previously elucidated concerning the second seal and its explosive events, which will occur starting around July, especially in August. This is going to be in tandem with the Olympic Games. It's moving right now. Population explosion, people's cereals are growing, all kinds of stuff. So, and we know that just by looking at the Babylonian cuneiform. Babylonian cuneiform for this period right here talks about land deeds, titles, taxes, talks about shipping manifests, talks about cargoes going up and down the Euphrates and Tigris, overland trade trains and all that. Yeah, 108 years after the flood, yeah, civilization was continuing on. Now, it didn't have all the advancements and amenities of the pre-flood world, hadn't got to that point yet, but everything was okay. People were surviving. So all right, we're moving on. 118 years after the flood. 118 years after the flood was equal to our 1906. 1906 was a long time ago. That was a long time ago. The Masila, what is it? The Masila earthquakes, 1906. Yeah, I think the earthquake in I guess it's pronounced Massilia in Europe. See, that's 1906. That's crazy. My criminal history is in any way a defense against your shill research, then by all means, get after it. Get after it. Because I'm not backing up and don't even care. But yeah, I get emails from a lot of people who show me the exchanges between famous people, man, that you wouldn't even believe, man. Shit talking. But you won't hear any of these people on these platforms calling me out. So yeah, this video is really in response to that. So I'm going to inform you guys of the business. This isn't just this dude, Jimmy Corsetti. It's not just Matthew LaCroix signing up on the wrong team and turning around, having to toe the line, holding on to Billy Carson's belt loop everywhere he goes. Okay, come, let us return unto the Lord, for he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. In the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Okay. Remember, a day unto the Lord is as 1,000 years. Applying that eschatological interpretation, we have 3 days described here, and it says he will tear us apart. Nostradamus also isolated this year, but he did it 400 years previously, and by a totally different method. So, Nostradamus historian David Ovason, I've read 2 of his books. In his book, The Secret of Nostradamus, wrote that the prophet employed the lunar timeline of Trithmeus in quatrain 148. This is the centuries, which reads, "The sun will take the remaining days, and then is accomplished the end of my prophecy." So David Ovason believes that this quatrain pinpointed the year 1901. David Ovason is a Nostradamus scholar, and he is known and respected for his position in Nostradamus translations and decoding around the world. And this man read this passage about the sun. The sun will take the remaining days, and then has accomplished the end of my prophecy. Yeah, it's like you're reading about an actual event in the history, in the world history. And because it is so mundane, it adds to its historicity. It adds to its historical value. It shows he's not embellishing. He's not. The only thing he embellished in was numbers. And now we understand that the numbers that were conveyed from Egyptian into Greek. And maybe a 0 was added to every number. We don't know. But that is a very popular theory. The conversion from like decimal or sexagesimal, or 2 different operating systems that were used in the ancient times, there has to be a reason why Plato's numbers are all inflated, and yet the story seems so very real. So this is what the scholars have conveyed, not me. I'm taking from the notes of men who have gone far deeper on the Atlantis narrative than I ever have. The descending passage, what they had done is dislodged a ceiling block, a cleverly concealed ceiling block out of 100 and something blocks on the ceiling, fell and exposed granite plugs. The granite plugs were so hard they couldn't get around them. So they tunneled around the granite plugs and were the first humans on record to go up into the infrastructure of the Great Pyramid. They were the first humans on record to lay eyes on the Grand Gallery, on the Queen's Chamber, and the attaching passages. They were the first humans on record to ascend the Grand Gallery and get into what's called the antechamber after passing over the Great Step, an architectural feature of amazing complexity, geometric precision. The face is a giant step 34 inches high to go into the flat plane of the King's Chamber and antechamber. You have to get up that 34-inch step. But the face of that step is 0 degrees longitude of the entire structure. The flat face of that 34-inch step is the central axis to the whole structure. So This is 400 years later. In the year 820 AD, the Muslims go in there and they don't find anything but an empty sarcophagus, or what they think is a sarcophagus. Star shafts, what they think are star shafts, could be ventilation shafts or whatever. They don't know. Can't see stars through them. So this is the extent of the knowledge of the Great Pyramid. It's still just as enigmatic as it was in the days of Herodotus. So another couple of centuries pass. An Arabic scholar, al-Makrizi, collects obscure traditions and old books and texts about the Great Pyramid. And his collection was amazing, and he wrote about it. I've talked about it in my published books. I've quoted some of the deals. But in his text, he shows that it was widely known to the ancient Egyptians and the Copts that the Great Pyramid complex was built before the flood, before a cataclysm. So, having said all that, 52 minutes into this video, I now need to show you guys a series of charts you've never seen before, because I just did them. But they're amazing. What we're going to see is mind-blowing. I'm telling you now, a technologically advanced civilization did build the Great Pyramid, and they did use machining, and they did use synthetic stone and geopolymers, and they did do it with a small minority of men and a lot of machines. It is my belief that the prophet actually targeted the year 1902. And this would have remained simply as wishful conjecture had it not been for the amazing discovery of another hitherto unknown Nostradamus text. In the year 1994, members of the Italian National Library in Rome discovered buried in their archives a formerly unknown and unpublished manuscript that was fully illustrated with paintings and text penned by Michele del Nostradam himself. After studying this work, the Roman researcher and Nostradamus expert named Ottavio Cesare Matti published in his own book, Nostradamus, The Lost Manuscript, the following passage written by the prophet, which refers to the year 1903. But the refusal to debate what you believe and hold to be true and what you have so willingly put out to the public sector for consumption, that's very telling. That's very telling. Now I could I'm not gonna talk. I ain't gonna talk like that. I'm gonna let these guys make it. But yeah, 100%, guys. If somebody is it just makes you wonder. Right? I mean, they got to know all this information is BS. They have to 100% believe that what they're putting out is total crap, and that you're a dumbass. There's no other way. There's no other way around this. You guys have seen the data, and it's always been available. Oh, it's always been there. It's always been out there in the field. We don't let the construct dictate the terms of our existence. We dictate our own terms, and we have that right because Source has given us the one thing that we need to know. As long as we're living in accordance with that one divine spiritual law, there are no other of these weird spiritual religious laws that obtain. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you obey that law, then the immortal within has all the rights, privileges, and immunities they can imagine. It can do what it wants to do. It can build the life it wants to live. It can do all these things. Jason is the immortal spirit within who spent a lifetime of effing up, of learning from experiences, of moving forward, of tripping, getting back up, dusting myself off, seeing other spirits in the same deal and lifting them up. And then in turn, tripping again, and the very spirits that I had lifted up in the past now reach down and pull me from the pit. This is what this experience is about. Finding those other kindred souls and giving them the benefit of your experiences and energy, and reaping from them the benefit of their experiences and energy. This is what this whole soul journey is about. Well, we see our puppy dogs on the other side. Man, why is it always... Okay, so basically, Meryl Gigi, what you're asking me is that beautiful little doe-eyed puppy dog, is that just an extension of the coding of the construct that's designed to make this a believable experience, or is that a real soul at another stage of development? Okay, I'm gonna tread on thin ice here, because you're asking me a first principle question. And I've called those out in the past with people. You're basically asking, it's almost a question such as, who is God? So, oh man, I got to be careful here. First of all, in the past, I've got past presentations where I have explained that I have the opinion that I have a deep belief, but it's still an opinion. I have this belief that mammals have souls, that mammals are maybe undeveloped souls that have not yet matured to the point that when they enter the construct, they're human. They can become human. They're not at that point yet. Now, I don't like talking about this, Meryl, and man, you sure get that knife under my ribs too. Your questions. I don't like talking about this because it's conjectural, but you're asking me for my opinion. So my opinion is they do have souls. My opinion is that they're not the same souls that we have. They haven't reached that stage of development. Are they connected to source? Yes. They nurture their young. They do all kinds of things. And yeah, I can understand from a uniformitarian perspective, there are going to be scientists and there's going to be biologists who try to explain the nurturing and the love for the younglings and all that as being just a part of their genetic programming. And 100% of all the reference books that I have on Sumerian, Akkadian, and Assyrian antiquities, 100% of those texts are written ex post facto. Just like I've shown you that 100% of all the histories of the world were all written and recorded ex post facto. Ex post facto is Latin. For those of you who don't know, it means after the fact. This is a key to understanding how our historical narratives have been passed down to us today. A reminiscence of these creatures, he adds, survived in the winged bulls and cherubic figures of the monuments and in idols like Dagon, of different animal forms combined. These monsters, it seems, in the new creation were banished to the depths of the ocean, the domain of Tiamat, where in the Bible times they still existed. It's pretty interesting. So what we have here is the admission of basically different fauna that existed, and they were gone, and they were so alien to the animals that were alive in the days of the post-reset period. It just later, after centuries and centuries, it later became, mythological, later became almost ridiculous. So, let's see. This should be compared to an ancient Babylonian tablet, which says of the conqueror of Tiamat, the creator. This is Merodach. Merodach, a wide space on the face of the deep bound round. He made dust and poured it on the space. The Lord Merodach around the sea made an embankment. All right. I know this sounds very confusing, but it is so simple. There are many depictions of the winged disc on Assyrian and Babylonian reliefs. Many of those depictions on the winged disc show Merodach riding on top of the winged disc. What you have described here is Merodach used the phoenix to deposit dust. It's an important event during the reign of the seven kings of Sumer. 2239 BC is the date of the Great Flood. 1687 BC, I've got 5 videos in a series called the Archaean Deluge that describe what happened to our world just on that one date, 1687 BC. This one date, 1687 BC, the Archaean flood, literally answers about 95% of all the mysteries of the ancient world. All the Technolithic, post-Technolithic, and Heliolithic architecture, megalithic blocks, buried cities, and civilizations that everybody's showing pictures of and theorizing about and doing measurements of all over Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and all these published books. And if that's true, then we're probably in it now. And if that's true, then that means demons aren't demons at all. Demons are us, but it's unfortunate ones who for some reason been disconnected from the life sim programming, and they're stuck here until a systemic reset, 2178, when all this flips back and they can get ejected or whatever happens. It's all theory, but I have to go with my research tenets. Just like 5239 BC is the farthest I go back. Why? Because it's all I can show data sets on. I don't bring material to your attention simply because I'm trying to get you to believe that's the only material in existence to review. I bring material to your attention because I can back it up with data sets or very interesting arguments that are educated guesses. However, there's a whole lot I don't bring to your attention because I can't put up or shut up. I can't back that up. So I don't talk about the 7th millennium BC, 8th millennium BC, 9th millennium BC, and nor should anyone else, because I'm a very, very well-read individual. And if I haven't found references to a lot of things in the historical record, I'm pretty sure I can bank on it that most other people haven't either. So that's why I'm very confident in what I do and what I promote. When it comes to demons, I don't see any evidence of real demons existing. I see people just like you and I who are mad as hell that they no longer participate in the Avatar system. Well, in the movie Hellboy, 2004, you guys remember Hellboy, a lunar eclipse allows Hellboy to open the gates of hell to release the 7 gods of chaos. Where does that sound familiar? Yes, again, it's an eclipse being used to open a portal. And it's crazy. Remember, the book of Revelation is about opening a portal to the abyss in order to release Apollyon, the destroyer. And once he's released after the breaking of the 7 seals, once he's released, it takes all 7 seals to be broken for him to be released. And then once he's released, that's when the Great Tribulation begins. That's the narrative. That's the book of Revelation narrative. Yeah, so that's my presentation, guys. This is what 4 eclipse videos, all the research done to 4 and presented in 4 eclipse videos is that if anything unfolds on Monday, it's psyop or a natural occurrence of an earthquake that goes with it. That's not even a mystery to me. If it happens or doesn't happen, it's neither here nor there. It has nothing to do with the actual prophetic narrative that's unfolding in the book of Revelation. The eclipse is the crown given to the first horseman, basically when his ride is over. And the second horseman, Apollo Helios, is allowed to ride in. As soon as the moon moves away from the sun and the sun is clear again, the second horseman has begun to ride. So I'm not looking for major events. I'm looking for major announcements the day of and the day after, like April 8th, April 9th. I'm looking for major announcements attached to the eclipse, different things like that. But the actual events of the second seal, the breaking of the second seal, the riding of the second horseman, it's just like the first one. He foresaw the flood and built an ark. The Chinese version is very similar to the Atrahasis epic, the Sumerian text on the flood. So this is the Chinese dynasty. 34 years after the Great Flood, the Chinese begin a new dynasty. Now, I'm going to tell you now, I believe it's wrong. And you're going to see evidence for why I believe it's wrong here in a minute, because I have noticed that a lot of the older Chinese dates are all 30 to 35 years off. And that's because once they used one chrono marker to date several other things, that one chrono marker was 30 to 35 years off, and it got everything before that dated off. Same thing that happened with the Jewish calendar, and the reason why it's 134 years off from all the calendars that are operable today. There is 1656. Remember, these measurements are all taken by Sir Flinders Petrie. They're the only ones accepted by the scientific community. This is 1,656 vertical inches from the base of the pyramid to the bottom of the great slab, a single slab under the king's chamber. Now, the slab is 534 inches long. Well, when you couple that with the 3,361 sloping inches of the entire grand gallery and ascending passage here to the conjunct, you have precisely 3,895 inches, the beginning of the calendar, 3895 BC, Adam and Eve reset, when the survivors thought that a new heavens and new earth had been created because the destruction was so vast. So anyway, this is what we're waiting on. The eclipse. If there's any events that unfold with the eclipse, they're pure psyop. They're pure psyop. If an earthquake happens during the eclipse, there's nothing mysterious about it. As I've shown you guys, 2,000 years ago, Pliny the Elder published a book showing that eclipses and earthquakes go in tandem. There's no mystery here. There's none. The real mystery is in the timing of the eclipses, which is what we're going to get into here, because we're talking about field dynamics. Mr. Fort was of the opinion that non-human entities that look vaguely human had appeared in Earth. He has theorized that they came in spaceships, but he dismisses spaceships as superconstructions. And superconstructions are nothing but parts of the construct itself. Charles Fort never really entertained space as being anything other than a light show. He doesn't follow the model of black holes and quasars and pulsars and galaxies far, far, far away. The things that he has documented that have all come from the sky and the changes that he has documented in astronomy literally convinced him that the sky was as unreal as the very world we're living in. So he had trouble trying to explain some of the things that he believed. What do you do when you find out it's divisible by 138? I'm going to tell you what you do. You start paying attention to what Archaix is trying to show you, because our world is not what you think. This has been my message from my very first video. We do not live in a real world. It's impossible. We live inside a construct. Situated opposite the mouth of the Lena says the whole island, which is about 33 leagues long, is all bones. Except 3 or 4 small rocky mountains is a mixture of ice, bones, and sand. And as the shores fall from the heat of the sun's rays thawing them, the tusks and bones of the mammoth are found in great abundance. So in the Archaix analysis of my first 3 eclipse videos, I had mathematically connected Pfizer, COVID, and the Jabberwocky to April 8th eclipse. Mathematically connected and showed it in charts. In my analysis, I also mathematically connected, using calendrics, the Purge movie franchises to the April 8th eclipse. This is very important, guys. We're going to build up all this pressure, and it's going to beautifully create. We're going to attach whatever we got to attach to it, and we're going to create free energy from water. The construct loves introducing new things. Inventions, it thrives on them. I've said this many times on my channel. So this right here was welcomed because every verbal piece of data the construct absorbed in figuring out what all these avatars were doing, working together, was that these divine instructions, these architectural instructions, were building a power plant, a water pump, building something that was mundane but curious, and it was built. But once it was built, there was an explosion in the king's chamber. It was enough power to literally upload all the arithmetic that was hidden in the structure. And they did it. They did it. Shows absolutely that Zechariah Sitchin, Billy Carson, Matt LaCroix, all these people that are trying to tell you that all these huge numbers in the cuneiform text mean that an actual king sat on the throne of Shuruppak for 64,800 years before the flood. Absolutely ridiculous. But the Jews knew you had to divide every one of these numbers by the Sumerian sexagesimal year. 360 degrees became 360 days. Every single shar is a turning of the stars. And when you do that, every bit of it fits. And the very fact that these kings that are mentioned on the Ashmolean king list, these dynasties like Kish and the Ison dynasty that were after the flood, it's amazing that archaeology, which does not use the chronological monographs that we find in the cuneiform text, archaeology uses the stelae, uses the monuments, the regnal list. It uses things that have actually been found, the cities that are mentioned in the text, artifacts that have been found. Archaeology absolutely dates these kings to the 24th, 23rd, and 22nd century BC. I am impressed with the fact that the eclipse path is going through all these towns called Nineveh, and that it starts in a town called Jonah, Texas. I find that really interesting. I may look into that. But right now I'm doing too much study on the Olympiads because I got to release my Olympiad, my Olympiad rituals and breaking of the seals video concerning 2024. I mean, the cat's already out of the bag. 6 months ago, I did a video explaining to you guys what's really going on with the migrant situation, all the fifth columners, and how in 2024 they're going to have all these sleeper cells activated to attack infrastructure in all Western countries, and they're going to blame Islam to wire up Christianity to go help Jerusalem in the Middle East. This is the whole plan in a nutshell. I just gave it to you in 60 seconds. That's what this is all about. And technically, in the field, this is the breaking of the second seal. That's coming up. That video's coming up. So, all right. Chat's going good. There's a reason why they don't want to debate the Atlantis narrative, guys. It's because it's attached to another phenomenon. There is another reason why they do not want to entertain the day count system. The ancient Shar system of the Sumerian sexagesimal mathematics. They don't want to talk about it. The reason is it's a domino effect. Once the Atlantis dating is corrected, it draws attention to the Phoenix phenomenon because it's exactly what happened to Atlantis. And now they're in the middle of this thriving Near East metropolis, and in Babylon and in Calna and in Assyria, they come across these amazing libraries. And in these libraries, they learned about the world before the flood. And in these libraries, they found references to the race of Adamu and Kava, in the Akampendu, the people who in sorrow roam. And they found out about basically two major competing socio-political systems in the pre-flood world. One of them was a 10-king government. The other one was a 7-king government, and they were apart. There were two separate civilizations. I don't know if they're at war or not, but they were totally different competing civilizations in the pre-flood world. And they were known for different things, and they have different. Archaix is about the intelligent. We don't care about the masses. We already know where the masses stand. We already understand the concepts of dungeon programming. We already know about ABC and CBS and BBC and CNN. We already know about the political duality and how it's all BS. We already know that everybody in politics is a puppet. Everybody has sold out. There are no more good guys. We understand this. We understand this because we watch it every day. This circus on mainstream media. We watch it and we see it every day. And we know that the truther community has slowly been hijacked, the alt media community. And we have these big, huge platforms that used to never talk about the topics they're talking about now, because alt media has become the new media. So they have to infiltrate, and they do it by subterfuge, and they do it by interviewing and putting people like Billy Carson on a pedestal, an absolute moron. Yeah, you guys already know. And if he doesn't like that designation, he's willing to debate me about it. But this is the world we live in. It's a clown show. Well, we don't have to participate. We don't. So I'm saying these things because the subject matter of this video is not about the Phoenix phenomenon, Nemesis X object. We're not talking about the dark satellite. We're not talking about cross-calendrical parallels. We're not going to be talking about anything about calendrical isometrics. We're not talking about anything about the palindromic nature of reality. We've covered this in hundreds of videos. We'll do Q&As in the future on that as well. This video, the subject matter is very clear. I would like one of my moderators to copy and paste what the subject matter is, because I put it very succinctly in the description box. We're going to be talking about concepts related to breaking pattern, reality tunnels, the oversoul. We're going to be talking about spiritual concepts. He's another scholar. He was another educated elite of the time. Now, Charles Piazzi Smith, Astronomer Royal for Scotland, he set out. He was refused a grant. The Royal Society was not trying to hear this. They did not want to see any evidence of any type of advancement other than ancient Egyptian, the pyramids. They refused his grant. He went anyway on his own personal money and donations. He and his wife traveled to Egypt, and they lived there, and he studied the Great Pyramid. The most accurate, even far more accurate than the French. He measured every surface, every dimension that he could imagine, every aspect of the Great Pyramid in and out. Charles Piazzi Smith was very thorough. He brought along equipment to measure the dimensions of the stones, the precise angle of all the sections, the ascending passage, descending passage. He brought all the instruments that were needed. And he provided astronomical calculations based off the architecture of the Great Pyramid, and even to the hundredths of an inch, with exactitude. He even showed how the architecture was showing lineaments in longitude and latitude. Really complex material. I have this book in my library. I've showed it. It is Our Inheritance in the Great Pyramid. He believed that whoever built that structure did it for a future generation that was able to decode the material, because it wouldn't make sense to have this level of mathematical precision and complexity if it wasn't to be deciphered by someone. That's a very complex belief. You're either a part of the collective and you are going through the collective routines, living a reactionary life, and you're calling yourself a victim. Or two, you're the co-creator. You have phased out of that. And it's very difficult to stay in that state, but you can do it for prolonged periods of time, long enough every day to build the world of tomorrow. But that's all you need to do. You phase back and forth is what you do. You live in two separate realities. One is for the highly individualized soul, living a reality tunnel that is building for itself and for those that are around you. Or you can live in the collective, and you can follow the routines and the dungeon programming of the world. It's as simple as that. To create, for me to explain any further would completely defy its simplicity. Two different worlds, you choose which one you want to be in. One of them you're very powerful, and the other one you're a victim. All right, let's see. Denali Princess. I've never seen that name. I would like your opinion. Do you think the direct energy weapons could be considered small arms? Okay. So, anyway, when I was in prison, I had literally given myself up in the world, had nothing to lose, and I totally immersed on a mission. Just opened my mind, set aside all my Christian programming, Christian beliefs, biblical beliefs, Southern Baptist beliefs, my cultural beliefs, my national beliefs, my patriotic beliefs, everything. I just set it aside, and I just started looking at all my research notes and all my information with a whole new pair of eyes. And I started reading other materials that priorly I would never touch. One of those first books was Children of the Matrix by David Icke. Another book was The New World Order, then The Unseen Hand, then William Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse. So this led me into scholastic academic research, and I started just going through the special material. So thank you, Fearless. One Tux, how you doing? Break free transformations. I like that. You guys know my motto. You can break free or die trying. Anything less isn't worth it. Let's see. I'm going to remove that. Hey, Hex Alchemist. I've been super busy, man. 100 degrees in North Cal. Come on, man. You guys probably aren't used to that. But that's normal Texas summer here. We'll always get about 60 days, 100 and something degree temperature. So why all, what do you think is really going on, guys? Why all of a sudden is a shill someone who is very easily disproven? You guys have seen my videos. I didn't give Billy Carson any mercy in that dumb, ridiculous Emerald Tablets book he published. And then when the book by Matt LaCroix, because the book is by Matt LaCroix, Billy Carson has one little section in there, and it's a bunch of Facebook copy and paste BS. Yeah, I showed you guys the fact from the fiction in that. First 40 years of my life, washed in the blood of the Lamb, twice baptized, believed my Bible thumping, arguing with people about the Bible. You already know my story. That's who I was. But that's dungeon programming. I had only deceived myself that being able to use the word of God as a sword actually made me spiritual, as opposed to my actions toward others in the field being true measure of spirit. Huge difference. Huge difference. I now feel sorry for those I listen to who have the ability to preach, have the ability to just run. I have a really good memory too. I've demonstrated this multiple times. And I can quote Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse too, but now I feel empty, scraped out, and hollow because in the past, when I did that, it was for the wrong reasons. It was because I thought that I was demonstrating my connection to the oversoul, God, the Godhead, wherever you want to call this entity, by what I had memorized from a book I thought was written by God, but instead, come to find out, was written by inspired men. Doesn't change the dynamic, but it changes how I view my relationship in the construct with others now, and thus acquire a new eastern seaboard 1,200 miles long. This is amazing, guys. I have explained to you over and over that after 2040, Australia is going to be prime real estate. I've been telling you that for 3.5 years, way before I read this book. That after 2040, because of a 30-degree shift, Australia is going to be in a prime area. The medical establishment is not going to ever make you do something, but they will put out a scenario that is so toxic and so heinous that you will think you have no way out. Instead of just saying no and walking away, you succumb to the pressure. the fear programming that has been put before you, and you succumb to the artificial facade of trust that these wearers of white robes have bestowed upon the human family. We have been very carefully programmed to accept those who wear white as bringers of truth, so we would never suspect that they are actually killing us. They're the ones that come out of that Mexican San Judas Tadeo witchcraft mindset. Participate. There are those that come out of that rigid, compartmentalized, holier than thou Southern Baptist concept. You come out of that. That's how I was raised, guys. You already know. First 40 years of my life, washed in the blood of the Lamb, twice baptized, believe my Bible thumping, arguing with people about the Bible. You already know my story. That's who I was. But if we live in a codified reality and everything dissolves into mathematical programming, then it's very easy to change a few nuances. And all of a sudden, people who are communicating can't even understand each other anymore. Their own mode of communication has been altered to the point where they can't understand someone else. The story in the Tower of Babel was that languages were created. He's essentially saying that what the scientists promote is no different than the faith of the religionists. Nothing is different. Simply because they wear their white robe coats and promote it something as fact does not necessarily make it a fact. It's just like something equally like he mentioned earlier, all these ridiculous theories of uniformitarians, just like the Big Bang Theory. How can you call yourself a scientist and even discourse about something as ridiculous as the Big Bang Theory? How? To begin that conversation, you have to take it on faith there was a Big Bang. Apollo Pharmakia, Apollo the poisoner, is going to become Apollo Helios, the second horseman. And the second seal can only be broken after this happens. And what is the transference? What's the signal? It's when a crown appears in the sky. That crown is the corona of the sun around the moon in total eclipse. So this basically means that the first phase of the elite's plan is complete. It took 4 years. And the poison of Apollo has been administered to the people. The next phase of their sinister plan cannot unfold until after Apollo receives the crown. The eclipse must pass before their agenda can continue. I've been speaking for a while and I have not looked at my chat. Charles Darwin felt the pressure so much when he created The Origin of Species and basically put an outline together for natural selection, even though no intermediate transitional life forms have ever been found. What we find fossilized is the exact same life forms that we find alive today. So he couldn't explain this, and at the end of his life, and they never cite this, but I have on my channel, Charles Darwin said that after looking and examining all the evidence, nothing could be truer than the fact that our world has been destroyed multiple times. This is 100% a uniformitarian statement. No, I'm sorry. It is a catastrophist statement. No uniformitarian could agree with that. These are the two schools of thought. They've been at war for a while. But funding is why you haven't heard that catastrophism is the only school of world history that has been acknowledged since the scientists of the Alexandrian Library, since Lucretius wrote his most fascinating 7,355 line poem on the nature of the universe, which describes our world. Now, because we as finite beings in a subjective experience inside a construct can create our own little miniature worlds, also called simulations, also called virtual realities, And there's a lot of virtual reality games out there, RPG games, interactive games for a lot of people. So because we're able to do that now, what's to say it hasn't always existed? How do we know that these technologies were just shelved? Remember my videos on 1902? So here in 2024, we have almost perfected virtual reality gaming technology, RPG games. I don't indulge. I really don't care about games. I don't play video games. I don't do any of that. I used to. They used to be interesting to me. Now they're just a waste of time. I haven't done them in years. So this is it's interesting though. The virtual reality in the simulated technologies are so advanced that before we even put Air Force and Army pilots in $500 million war machines, they have to graduate simulators first. And the only way that we will put these pilots in these very expensive jet craft and vehicles is when they've perfected the simulations. It's almost as if all these technologies already existed and they just unleashed them in 1902 all at the same time.